Welcome back, and thank you for tuning in to Midnight Affairs Tales. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know what part of the world you are watching from right now. Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story, Chapter 1. The Last Goodbye. The airport reeked of cheap coffee and rain. Ford Calhoun hugged his wife for the last time, but there was no tremor in her body, no ache in her fingers as they touched his back. She was already gone in every way that mattered. He smelled another man's cologne clinging faintly to her scarf. "You will call me when you land?" Amberlyn asked, blinking up at him, voice sweet, too sweet. She could lie better than any spy Ford had ever met. He should know. Lying used to be his job. "Of course," Ford said, voice steady. His heart was a stone. Heavy, cold, sinking. The announcement blared overhead. Flight 107 to Zurich, boarding now. Ford pulled back, looked into Amberlyn's bright, tearless eyes, and smiled. It was the kind of smile you give to a ghost you used to love. "I will see you soon," he lied. She kissed him, mechanical, empty, then turned and walked away first, checking her phone before she even reached the sliding doors. Ford watched her disappear into the chaos of departing families and crying children. He stood still, breathing her betrayal like secondhand smoke. His real flight was not boarding. He was not leaving the country. Ford walked calmly past the gates, past security, out through a side door where a black SUV waited. Inside sat a man in a dark suit, a silent nod of understanding passing between them. "You ready?" the driver asked. Ford looked one last time at the terminal, at the life he was about to burn to the ground. "Let us bury a ghost," Ford said. The SUV pulled into traffic, and somewhere overhead, an announcement called for a man who no longer existed. But Ford Calhoun was not dead. He was just getting started. What would a man do if he had nothing left to lose, but everything left to prove? "Wait, can I share something personal with you? You've made it this far into the video, which tells me something powerful. You're actually enjoying this story. But here's what's crazy. Many of you watch, feel every twist, every emotion, but forget to hit subscribe. I've set a dream goal, 10,000 subscribers. It's bold. It's big. And you, yes, you watching right now, can help make it happen. If you don't subscribe now, you might miss the next plot twist, the next betrayal, the next karma-filled revenge. So here it is. This is the moment. Tap subscribe. Turn on the bell. Be part of the journey. And when we hit 5,000 subscribers, I've got something special waiting just for you. Now, let's dive back into the story. 3 weeks later, Amberlyn Calhoun sat before a cluster of microphones, a trembling hand clenching a tissue she did not need. "My husband was a good man," she choked out, dabbing dry eyes. "He loved this country." The reporters clicked their cameras. The community rallied around her, showering her in sympathy, casseroles, and pity. Amberlyn played the grieving widow like a virtuoso, but inside, she was counting dollars. Ford's life insurance payout was already in process. His pension was coming next. And Nolan Price, the real reason for her crocodile tears, sat just off stage, smirking into his whiskey glass at the back of the crowd. From a nearby rooftop, Ford watched through binoculars. The city sprawled in gray drizzle behind him. He saw everything. The fake trembling lip, the stolen glances, the rehearsed anguish. He felt nothing. Inside her home, hidden behind walls and vents, Ford had left tiny eyes and ears. Cameras no bigger than a nail head. Microphones woven into the vents. He listened every night as Amberlyn and Nolan laughed over the dead man's accounts, plotted new scams, and mocked the man she once promised to love. Ford recorded every word. She actually said she loved that boring bastard? Nolan sneered one night, bare-chested in Ford's own kitchen. "She said a lot of things," Amberlyn purred, curling against him. "All lies." Ford turned off the feed that night, not because he could not bear to hear it, but because he needed no more proof. She had made her choice. Now, it was Ford's turn to choose how the story would end. And he had all the time in the world. Chapter 3, Secrets in the Walls. The house was silent at night, but it breathed. Behind the marble countertops and designer walls, Ford's tiny cameras blinked alive, recording every secret whispered in the dark, every scheme hatched between champagne kisses, every plan to steal what was left of Ford's legacy. Amberlyn thought she was safe. She thought the dead stayed dead. She was wrong. Ford had spent the last decade in the CIA learning how to disappear, how to fake a life, how to bury the truth under layers of falsehood. It was almost insulting how easy it had been to fake his death. A staged field report, a planted DNA sample, a quick ceremony with no body recovered. And while the world mourned, Ford built his case. Tonight, he sat in the back of a grimy dive bar, laptop open, headphones in. On the screen, Amberlyn smiled lovingly at Nolan across a candlelit dinner in Ford's own dining room. "You need to move fast," Nolan said between bites. "The accounts will not stay hidden forever." "I know," Amberlyn said, brushing her fingers along his wrist. "Ford made it too easy. He trusted me with everything." Nolan laughed, low and cruel. "You are smarter than he ever knew," he said. Amberlyn leaned back, sipping her wine, smug. Ford paused the feed, staring at the frozen image. Smart? Maybe, but not smarter than a man who had already written the final act of her story. Ford closed the laptop with a soft click, dropped a few bills on the sticky bar counter, and pulled on his jacket. The next phase was ready. Amberlyn thought she was building a new life atop Ford's grave. She did not realize he had been digging hers all along. The world had written Ford Calhoun's name in stone. A hero lost overseas. A faithful husband mourned. A ghost. But ghosts did not bleed. And Ford had never been good at playing dead for long. From the dim, cement-walled safe house 2 towns over, Ford stared at the screen, watching his wife's betrayal unfold in real time. Beneath the blinking feed, encrypted files stacked up, bank statements, offshore transfers, secret real estate deals, all tied back to Amberlyn and her lover, Nolan Price. Ford's plan had never been simple revenge. It was not enough to expose an affair. That would be too small, too forgettable. He wanted to tear down the entire kingdom they had tried to build from the ashes of his life. Ford's fingers flew across the keyboard. Every transaction Amberlyn made was now mirrored into his files. Every whispered conversation at the country club was captured by a paid informant. Even Nolan's smug dinner reservations left a breadcrumb trail of fraud and conspiracy. It was bigger than adultery. It was financial crime. It was public corruption. And soon, it would be the kind of scandal that destroyed careers, families, even governments. Ford leaned back in the cracked leather chair and allowed himself one long breath. This was not about love anymore. It was about justice. And justice, he knew, moved slow. But when it struck with a blade honed sharper than grief. The printer in the corner whirred softly, spitting out another stack of documents. Ford grabbed the pages and read the latest betrayal in black ink. Amberlyn had signed a falsified deed using his power of attorney, seizing his family's land to sell it under a fake trust. Ford smiled without warmth. They were not just playing with fire. They had built their entire house out of gunpowder. And he held the match. At the gala committee meeting, Amberlyn Calhoun played the part of a grieving widow to perfection. She wore soft gray, tasteful pearls, and a smile that trembled with exactly the right amount of sorrow. To the outside world, she was a symbol of strength in tragedy, forging ahead with the charity event that Ford had loved so much. What a beautiful lie. Amberlyn perched at the head of the conference table, flipping through event plans, approving caterers, pretending she cared about raffle prizes. Nolan Price lounged near the coffee machine, sunglasses perched on his head, issuing sarcastic comments about floral arrangements. Every move they made was being recorded. Every grin, every touch, every secret glance. Ford had bribed the gala's AV technician, a struggling college kid desperate for tuition money. The young man now funneled every camera feed directly to Ford's laptop. The gala would be televised nationally, a feature for a major network's Heroes Among Us segment. Perfect. Poetic. Amberlin's lie would unravel under the same spotlight she had craved. "Make sure the cameras catch the memorial speech," Amberlin said, voice sugary. "We want the country to see how much Ford meant to us." Nolan snorted softly into his coffee. Ford watched from the shadows of cyberspace, jaw clenched. They were building a shrine out of his corpse, and he would tear it down with their own hands. Outside the meeting hall, the world moved on. Birds gathering on power lines, cars hissing on wet pavement. Life did not pause for betrayal. Neither would Ford. He clicked through the feed, marking the faces of every city official who smiled too widely at Amberlin, every fake friend who offered hollow condolences. When the time came, no one would be spared. Not the liars, not the thieves, and not the cowards who stayed silent. Jessica Donovan watched her sister from the back of the room, arms folded tightly. Something was wrong. It had been gnawing at her gut since the funeral. Amberlin's tears dried too fast. Her smile sharpened too quickly. And then there were the late-night calls Jessica had overheard, whispers and laughter with someone who was definitely not Ford. Now, at this meeting, Jessica saw it again. Amberlin basking under attention like a queen accepting tribute, not a widow mourning a fallen husband. Jessica leaned closer as Nolan Price brushed Amberlin's hand under the table, quick as a blink. Amberlin's cheeks flushed, and she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, smiling slyly. Jessica's stomach twisted. Grief did not look like that. Jessica slipped out of the room, heart pounding. She needed proof before she accused. She was not about to destroy what little family they had left over suspicions. Ford had trusted Amberlin, had built a life with her. But then again, Ford had also trusted a lot of people. And Jessica was beginning to wonder if he had paid the ultimate price for that trust. Standing outside in the rain, Jessica pulled out her phone and typed a message to a number she had not used in years. An old friend. Someone who still owed Ford a favor from the days when Ford's protection had saved a life without needing a thank you. Message sent. Jessica shoved the phone into her pocket and looked back at the glowing windows of the gala hall. Inside, Amberlin laughed, throwing her head back, oblivious. Jessica's fists tightened at her sides. Whatever secrets Amberlin was hiding, Jessica would find them, even if it shattered every illusion they had left. The night was humid, thick with the smell of gasoline and blooming magnolias. Ford leaned against the brick wall of a crumbling alleyway downtown, hood pulled low over his eyes. Across the street, Nolan Price shook hands with Councilman Vance Maddox, a man Ford remembered from whispered corruption briefings back in Washington. Maddox handed Nolan a thick envelope. Nolan tucked it into his jacket with a grin that made Ford's fists clench. It was bigger than he had imagined. Amberlin was not just betraying her vows. She was laundering dirty money through Maddox's shell companies, funneling illicit funds through Ford's name, making him an unwitting accomplice to crimes that could bury him for life if exposed wrongly. Ford exhaled slowly, steadying his heartbeat. Across the street, Nolan and Maddox laughed and clapped each other on the shoulder like old war buddies. A Blacktown car pulled up, and Nolan slid inside, vanishing into the night. Ford moved, melting into the shifting crowds, mind already racing. He needed more than whispers. He needed undeniable proof, and he needed it fast. He dialed a number burned into his memory, a fixer from his old CIA days. The call connected on the second ring. "Calhoun, did not think I would hear from you again," said a gravelly voice. "I need eyes on Councilman Maddox," Ford said, scanning the street. "And I need it yesterday." The voice chuckled darkly. "Ghosts asking for favors. You must be desperate." "I am not desperate," Ford said coldly. "I am meticulous." A pause, then a grunt. "Consider it done." Ford hung up, sliding deeper into the city's underbelly. He had enough for suspicion. Soon, he would have enough for destruction. Because Amberlin did not just betray a husband. She had betrayed a ghost. And now that ghost was coming for her. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Amberlin Calhoun was sipping champagne in her sunroom, bare feet resting on imported silk rugs, when the housekeeper handed her a plain white envelope. No stamp, no return address. Amberlin frowned, tearing it open lazily, expecting a condolence card or perhaps a thank you note from another groveling socialite. Instead, a single line stared back at her, handwritten in black ink. Nothing stays buried forever. Her heart stopped. The champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattering against the tile floor. Shards sparkled around her bare toes, but she barely noticed. Hands trembling, she turned the envelope upside down. Empty. No signature. No clue. She stumbled back into the chair, mind spinning. Was it a threat? A prank? Was someone blackmailing her? Or worse, was Ford alive? No. Impossible. She had seen the news. The closed casket. The folded flag. Still, unease twisted in her gut like a blade. "Ma'am?" the housekeeper asked nervously. Amberlin forced a brittle smile. "Just allergies. Clean this up, please." She rushed upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind her, heart hammering against her ribs. She tore open drawers, yanked jewelry boxes apart, checking for listening devices, hidden cameras. Every creak of the house made her skin crawl. In the corner of the room, her phone buzzed. "Nolan." She answered on the second ring, voice low. "Someone knows." "What are you talking about?" Nolan's voice was thick with annoyance. "I got a letter. No name. Just a threat. Probably some whack job trying to cash in on your 15 minutes, he said dismissively. But Amberlin's gut told her otherwise. Ghosts did not stay dead forever. And some sins came back screaming. Jessica Donovan stared at her laptop, a knot of dread tightening in her chest. The files had arrived 20 minutes ago from the anonymous number she had messaged, encrypted documents, video clips, bank statements. At first, she thought it was a mistake. But as she clicked through, a sickening pattern emerged. Amberlin, Nolan, Maddox, laundering millions through fake trusts and offshore accounts. Ford's name used as camouflage, his honor used as a shield for crimes. Jessica felt her hands shaking on the keyboard. She had suspected an affair. She had not suspected this. A light knock on her door made her jump. She slammed the laptop shut and tried to calm her breathing. It was her neighbor, dropping off a borrowed casserole dish. Jessica smiled weakly, thanked her, and shut the door fast, locking it with a trembling hand. She turned and looked at the closed laptop. What was she supposed to do? Go to the police? No. Maddox had friends everywhere. She could end up buried next to Ford. Jessica's chest ached with helpless fury. She thought of Ford, his rough laugh, his steady hands. How he had been the one person she trusted without question. If he were still alive, no? She shook the thought away. But if he had been alive, he would have fought. Jessica opened the laptop again, jaw set. She would not be a pawn. She would be a player. And she would make sure Amberlin's lies burned before they could destroy anyone else. Amberlin Calhoun sat at the edge of her bed, clutching the letters so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her mind raced in circles, chasing ghosts. Across the room, Nolan Price adjusted his cufflinks, watching her with growing impatience. "You are overreacting," he said, shrugging into his jacket. "One stupid letter. You think the dead are sending mail now." Amberlin stared at him, searching his face for any flicker of fear. She found none. "What if it is not a joke?" she whispered. "What if Ford? What if someone knows?" Nolan rolled his eyes. "You are letting guilt make you stupid." He grabbed a silver money clip from the dresser, fat with crisp bills stolen from their latest scam. "Focus," Nolan said, voice low. "The money is moving. Maddox wants the final documents signed by Friday. After that, you and I are golden." Amberlin nodded mechanically, but inside, something cracked. Golden. That had been the plan from the start, had it not? Marry Ford. Wait. Cash out. She had never imagined the guilt would feel so heavy. She had never imagined the past could bleed into the present so violently. Nolan crossed the room, tilting her chin up roughly. "Get your head straight," he said, "or you will ruin everything." Then he was gone, the door slamming behind him with a finality that made her jump. Amberlin sat frozen for a long moment. Then, moving stiffly, She pulled open her nightstand drawer. Hidden beneath old birthday cards and broken jewelry was a second burner phone, the one she had used to text Nolan during her marriage. Her thumb hovered over the keypad. Maybe it was time to find out if the dead could bleed after all. Because if Ford Calhoun was alive, she would finish what she started. Ford sat in a shadowed booth at a grim diner on the edge of town, stirring black coffee he had no intention of drinking. Across from him, a man in a rumpled gray suit tapped a folder against the table. "Councilman Maddox is dirtier than a landfill," the man said. "Bribes, kickbacks, land scams, all buried under a dozen fake companies." Ford flipped through the photos, grainy images of Maddox exchanging envelopes, scheming with Nolan Price and Amberlin. Paper trails, bank transfers, signatures, everything tied together in an elegant web of greed. "How deep does it go?" Ford asked quietly. The man grimaced. "All the way to the mayor's office, maybe higher. Your wife and Price, they are just a small piece." Ford leaned back, processing. This was not just personal anymore. It was systemic, a rot that had spread through the city's bones. "Good. You wanted to destroy it all. Will you testify when the time comes?" Ford asked. The man hesitated, then nodded once. "For you?" "Yeah. You saved my brother's life once. I owe you." Ford slid a thumb drive across the table. "Back up everything. Multiple locations. Assume they will come for you." The man pocketed it with a grim nod, then stood. Ford watched him leave, then pulled out his phone. He opened the Gala's planning app. Amberlin's event was locked in for Friday night. National news coverage. VIP guests. The perfect stage. He smiled coldly. The empire Amberlin built on lies would fall, and the whole world would watch it burn. Amberlin swept into the ballroom, her heels clicking sharply against marble floors, her clipboard tucked under one arm. Final preparations for the gala were in full swing. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, tables gleamed with silverware polished to a mirror shine, and waiters buzzed around like frantic bees. In the corner, the event coordinator, a nervous young woman named Carly, approached with a shaky smile. Mrs. Calhoun, there is a small update," she said, wringing her hands. Amberlin arched an eyebrow. "What kind of update?" "Well, the broadcast crew from Channel 7. They said the station decided to upgrade the coverage. They are bringing a live national feed. Bigger exposure. It will be everywhere, television, streaming, even international affiliates." Amberlin's breath caught. Bigger exposure meant bigger sympathy, bigger donations, and bigger credibility. She smiled, warmth oozing through her voice like syrup. "That is wonderful, Carly. Thank you for letting me know." The girl beamed and scurried away. Amberlin turned toward the empty stage, imagining it. Her face, tear-streaked but brave, her voice cracking as she spoke of Ford's sacrifice. Headlines. Praise. Money flowing in like a tide. She would become untouchable. Behind the velvet curtains, hidden from view, Ford stood in the darkness, watching her. She did not know he had planted the idea with Channel 7. She did not know the AV techs were in his pocket. She did not know that when she stepped onto that stage, she would be stepping into a trap of her own making. Ford's hands curled into fists. 3 more days. 3 more days until the world saw Amberlin Calhoun for what she truly was. A liar, a thief, and soon a ghost. The night before the gala, Amberlin and Nolan celebrated in quiet luxury, far from prying eyes. The penthouse glowed in golden candlelight, glasses clinked, and laughter floated into the vaulted ceilings. Amberlin leaned back in her chair, legs crossed, swirling deep red wine in a crystal glass. Nolan grinned at her from across the table, a predator basking in the success of the hunt. "To tomorrow," Nolan said, raising his glass. Amberlin smirked. "To the future." They toasted, their glasses ringing sharply in the air. Outside, rain slicked the city streets, distorting headlights into blurred rivers of color. In the hidden world beyond the penthouse walls, the net around them tightened. Ford watched the feed from a private surveillance van 3 blocks away, headphones pressed tight against his ears. Every word, every smirk, every secret was captured. Once the money clears, Nolan said, sipping his wine, we can ditch this charity nonsense and start fresh. You and me. No more small-town drama. No more ghosts. Amberlynn's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. What about the councilman? She asked carefully. Nolan waved a dismissive hand. Maddox is greedy, not loyal. He will take his cut and move on. The others will not touch us once we cash out. Amberlynn hesitated, studying him over the rim of her glass. Ford noted the pause, the tension. Good. Doubt was a weapon too. Relax, Nolan said, leaning back. Everything is already in motion. Ford's name, the gala, the donations, it is all perfect. Amberlynn forced a smile, but her fingers tightened around the stem of the glass until her knuckles turned white. In the surveillance van, Ford smiled coldly. Perfect. They thought they were invincible. They thought tomorrow was their coronation. They did not know it was their execution. At dawn, Ford slipped into the old house that once was his home. The security system was still programmed with his old codes. Amberlynn had never changed them. She had never imagined Ford could walk through that door again. He moved like a shadow through the dark halls, memories clawing at him, laughter in the kitchen, whispered promises in the dark. Lies, all of it, rotten and hollow. In the master bedroom, he opened the closet, scanning until he found it. A dusty box tucked behind old boots. Inside, under faded photographs and meaningless trinkets, was his emergency lockbox. Ford pried it open. Passports, cash, a backup drive, and the final piece of proof, a sealed USB containing footage from his secret home surveillance system. Footage that predated his death. Footage that showed Amberlynn and Nolan plotting before Ford ever vanished. Undeniable evidence. Ford pocketed the USB carefully, heart steady. Downstairs, he placed a single item on Amberlynn's vanity, an old photo of them on their wedding day, now slashed diagonally across the middle. No note, no threats, just a ghost signature. When Amberlynn came home after the gala, she would find it. Ford stepped into the morning light, breathing in the clean, sharp air. Rain had washed the streets clean overnight, but the city still smelled like betrayal. He walked away without looking back. Today was the day. The stage was set. The world was watching. And Ford Calhoun was ready to end the show. The gala sparkled under chandeliers and camera flashes. Soft music floated through the massive ballroom. Elegant men and women in black tie finery sipped champagne and exchanged shallow condolences. Amberlynn Calhoun stood at the center, radiant in silver, her smile a masterpiece of crafted grief. Cameras rolled. Reporters whispered. Drones hovered quietly overhead, streaming live. Jessica Donovan slipped through the crowd, clutching a small purse against her side. Inside, hidden beneath lipstick and tissues, was a backup flash drive Ford had sent her only hours ago, just in case. She scanned the room, searching for Ford, knowing he was near, but not daring to hope to see him yet. At the far end, Nolan Price leaned against the bar, toasting a city councilman, smug and relaxed. He had no idea. None of them did. Behind the main stage, technicians worked swiftly, patching in Ford's encrypted broadcast. 15 minutes. That was all the time left before the curtain fell. Amberlynn ascended the stage, clutching a framed photo of Ford against her chest. Her voice trembled perfectly as she began her speech. My husband was a hero, she said, eyes shining. He gave everything for this country. Tonight, we honor his memory and build a future he would be proud of. Applause. Camera flashes. The perfect moment. Ford watched from the shadows of the side entrance, face emotionless, heart steady. This was not just revenge. This was justice. And justice was never silent. Amberlynn gripped the podium tightly, her knuckles white against the polished wood. The cameras in front of her whirred softly, streaming her every word across the country. She gave her speech perfectly, a delicate balance of heartbreak and hope, rehearsed a dozen times in the mirror. Her voice cracked at all the right moments. Her hand brushed away a tear with just enough trembling to seem sincere. In the audience, heads nodded solemnly. Strangers wiped away tears. The perfect illusion. Jessica watched from the side, feeling bile rise in her throat. She had loved her sister once. She had believed in her. Now, all she saw was a polished liar standing on the bones of a good man. Behind the stage, in the equipment room, Ford stood with the broadcast technician, a wiry young man wearing headphones and an anxious expression. "You are sure about this?" the tech whispered. Ford's eyes did not blink. "Do it." The technician nodded, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Amberlyn finished her speech with a trembling whisper. "We honor the fallen by living bravely in their memory." Applause roared. The orchestra swelled. And then, the screens behind her flickered. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Amberlyn turned, confused. The national news feed froze, then jerked to life with a new image. It was not Ford's flag-draped coffin. It was a video, footage from inside her own home. Amberlyn's face drained of color as she stared at herself on the giant screen, laughing in bed with Nolan Price, mocking Ford's memory. The audience gasped. Reporters surged forward. The room shattered into chaos. Ford watched it all with a grim stillness. This was the beginning, and the world had not even seen the worst yet. Screams echoed through the ballroom as guests stumbled back from the stage, faces pale with shock. Cameramen scrambled to capture the unfolding disaster, their lenses swinging wildly as they realized the story had changed. Amberlyn staggered at the podium, frozen like a deer in headlights. "No, no, this is fake," she cried, her voice cracking. "This is not real." But it was real. Every sordid second played in brutal clarity. Amberlyn and Nolan plotting how to siphon Ford's pension. Amberlyn forging documents. Nolan laughing as he detailed how they would frame Ford's disappearance as heroic sacrifice. Every lie exposed. Every betrayal laid bare. The footage ended with a final image. Amberlyn's signature on a fraudulent contract bearing Ford's name. Silence fell over the ballroom like a guillotine blade. Ford stepped out from behind the curtains. The room gasped in unison. The dead had risen. Amberlyn's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, eyes wide with horror. Ford approached slowly, his black suit immaculate, his face carved from stone. He stopped a few feet from her, letting the cameras capture every angle, every devastating second. "This is what a hero's widow looks like," Ford said, his voice carrying across the stunned crowd. Gasps, whispers, journalists scrambling to broadcast every word. Amberlyn stumbled back, bumping into the podium, hands shaking. From the back of the room, FBI agents moved forward, badges flashing in the dim light. Ford turned slightly, voice hard as iron. "I have evidence of financial fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Charges have already been filed." Amberlyn's knees buckled. Ford stepped aside as the agents reached the stage. This was no longer a charity event. It was a public execution of reputation, of legacy, of lies. And the audience would never forget it. Amberlyn's world collapsed in slow, brutal seconds. The FBI agents gripped her arms firmly, snapping handcuffs around her slender wrists with a sharp metallic click. Her breath came in ragged gasps, the flashing cameras painting her humiliation in brutal, permanent color. Jessica watched from the side, her heart a knot of complicated feelings, sorrow for what could have been, fury for what had been done. Nolan tried to slip out through the back entrance, but another pair of agents intercepted him, pressing him against the marble wall as they read him his rights. The crowd buzzed like a disturbed hive. Shock, outrage, curiosity thick in the air. Amberlyn twisted, desperate. "This is a mistake," she shrieked. "I love Ford. This is a setup." Ford said nothing. His silence spoke louder than any accusation. He simply watched as they dragged her down the steps she had once climbed with pride. The gala fell into chaos, guests rushing to leave. News crews shoving microphones into the faces of confused councilmen, socialites crying into their cocktail napkins. Jessica pushed through the crowd and found Ford standing alone near the side exit, his shoulders stiff, his face unreadable. She hesitated, then touched his arm lightly. He turned, and for the first time in years, Jessica saw the brother-in-law she remembered, battle-scarred, but unbroken. "I am glad you are alive," she whispered. Ford nodded once, emotion flickering in his eyes. He did not smile. He did not need to. Justice was enough. As Amberlyn was dragged out into the flashing lights and shouting reporters, her screams lost against the night, Ford turned away. There was nothing left for him to say. Her empire was dust. Her lies were ash. And Ford Calhoun was finally free. Nolan Price shoved his way through the crowd outside the gala, his expensive shoes slipping on the rain-slick marble steps. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted. Spectators pointed and gasped. Handcuffs bit into his wrists, but he fought against the agents dragging him toward an unmarked black SUV. "This is a mistake," he bellowed. "I am innocent. I am being set up." The agents said nothing, their grips tightening. Ford Calhoun stood under the eaves of the building, arms folded, watching it all unfold. His expression was carved from ice, unmoved by Nolan's theatrics. Across the square, a giant video billboard played the footage again, Nolan and Amberlyn laughing, scheming, signing contracts under Ford's name. The city could see everything now. There was no saving face. As Nolan was shoved into the back of the SUV, the doors slammed shut with a satisfying finality. Ford turned away, blending into the crowd like a ghost. Nolan was not the end. He was just another piece falling into place. The councilmen who had taken bribes, the businessmen who had laundered money, the officials who had looked the other way, they were all exposed now. The city had feasted on lies for too long. It was time to tear the rot out by the roots. Tonight was only the beginning. Ford's steps were steady, purposeful, as he disappeared into the shadows, leaving the chaos behind. The dead did not speak, but sometimes they came back to make sure the living listened. Ford sat alone in the safe house, the glow of the monitors painting his face in ghostly light. He watched the news cycle loop endlessly. Amberlyn's tear-streaked mugshot, Nolan's frantic screams, city officials stammering as reporters demanded answers. Justice was being served live, frame by frame. But Ford's mind was not in the present. It drifted backward, pulled into memories that burned like coals against his skin. He remembered the night he found the first clue, Amberlyn's phone buzzing at midnight, a text flashing briefly on the screen. "Miss you already. NP." He remembered standing frozen in the doorway, hearing her laughter from the bathroom as she chatted with Nolan, thinking Ford could not hear. He remembered the cold silence at breakfast the next morning, the lies dressed up as smiles, the hollow kisses. The decision to vanish had not been made in one moment. It had been death by 1,000 cuts, each betrayal slicing deeper, each lie hollowing him out, until there was nothing left but the shell of a man who had once trusted her. Ford leaned back in the chair, closing his eyes. He had been forced to grieve a living person. That was the cruelest kind of mourning. Now, he had buried her memory properly, not with forgiveness, but with fire. The final stage was still ahead, and Ford Calhoun never left a mission unfinished. Morning broke over Charleston like a bruised eye, swollen, raw, exposed. News vans camped outside City Hall. FBI agents raided luxury condos. Headlines screamed betrayal and scandal. Amberlyn and Nolan were no longer the only ones falling. Ford moved through the city unseen, a ghost in plain sight. He stood on the courthouse steps, watching as Maddox was let out in handcuffs, his face sagging with defeat. More names would follow. The dominoes were falling. Jessica found him there, her coat wrapped tightly against the morning chill. For a long moment, they said nothing. Then she handed him a small package, a thumb drive. "Backup copy," she said. "Just in case." Ford nodded, tucking it into his pocket without a word. Jessica hesitated, then said, Are you staying?" Ford looked past her, beyond the crowds, beyond the flashing cameras. He thought of the life he had lost, the life he had avenged, and the new life waiting beyond these broken streets. "No," he said quietly. "My part here is done." Jessica's eyes glistened, but she nodded. Ford squeezed her hand once, firm, grateful, then turned and walked away. Each step was lighter than the last. Behind him, the city burned with the truth. Ahead of him, a horizon untouched by betrayal waited. Ford Calhoun did not belong among the dead anymore. He belonged to the living, and he was not afraid of the future anymore. Inside the marble courthouse, Amberlyn Calhoun sat slumped in an interrogation room, wrists cuffed to the cold metal table. Her hair clung to her damp forehead. Her silver gown was crumpled, stained with rain and humiliation. Across from her, Special Agent Morales laid out folder after folder, bank transfers, phone records, property deeds. Each document a nail driven deeper into the coffin she had built with her own hands. "You can cooperate," Morales said calmly, sliding another stack forward, "or you can go down with everyone else." Amberlyn licked her dry lips, throat constricting. "Everyone else?" she croaked. Morales smiled thinly. "Did you really think Nolan Price loved you?" Amberlyn's blood ran cold. The agent leaned forward, voice low and cutting. "You were never the partner. You were the pawn. The moment you outlived your usefulness, he planned to frame you." Amberlyn shook her head violently. "No. Nolan, Morales slapped down the final document. It was a marriage certificate between Nolan Price and another woman, dated years before Amberlyn ever met him. Amberlyn stared at it, the world tilting sideways. It was all a lie. The affair, the promises, the future. She had betrayed Ford for a man who had played her like a violin. Morales' voice turned steely. "Cooperate, Mrs. Calhoun. Give us everything. Or rot for crimes you did not even benefit from." Tears filled Amberlyn's eyes. Real tears this time. Her empire was gone. Her lover was a fraud. Her life was rubble. She opened her mouth, trembling. "I will talk," she whispered. Ford Calhoun sat in a nearby observation room, watching through the one-way glass. He said nothing, but deep inside, a part of him smiled coldly. Justice was not finished yet. The back corridors of the courthouse hummed with low conversations and the shuffle of paperwork. Ford leaned against a pillar, arms folded across his chest, watching the machinery of justice grind forward. Jessica found him there, breathless, cheeks flushed from running through the crowd. "You need to see this," she said urgently, pressing a tablet into his hands. Ford tapped the screen. A series of encrypted emails scrolled by, messages between Nolan and a string of foreign bank representatives. Offshore accounts, secret investments, documents filed under Amberlyn's name without her knowledge. Nolan had planned it all meticulously. When the fraud was exposed, Amberlyn would take the fall. Nolan would vanish into the Caribbean, rich, untouchable. Ford's jaw tightened as he scrolled faster, reading the final messages. Nolan setting up fake witnesses, laundering evidence, even arranging anonymous tips to the FBI that would point the blame squarely at Amberlyn. Jessica's voice broke through the storm raging in his mind. "He never loved her," she said. "She was just a tool." Ford handed back the tablet, his face grim. "She chose to betray me," he said quietly. "But in the end, she was betrayed even worse." Jessica hesitated, then asked, "Do you feel sorry for her?" Ford looked out the courthouse windows, watching as the rain began to fall again, washing the city clean. "No," he said. "I feel sorry for the woman she could have been." He pushed away from the wall, his steps measured. Nolan Price was still free, still thinking he had won. Ford had one more score to settle, and he was very good at settling scores. 3 days later, Ford Calhoun entered the grand lobby of the Belmont Legal Center, the divorce papers in hand, crisp and cold. He wore a dark tailored suit, his tie knotted with precision. His eyes, once warm, were now steel. Amberlyn sat at a long table inside the conference room, flanked by 2 exhausted-looking lawyers. Her wrists were free now, but the shadows under her eyes made her look years older. She flinched when Ford entered, color draining from her face. The room seemed to shrink around them, thick with the weight of everything unsaid. Ford sat down across from her, slowly and deliberately. He slid the documents across the table without a word. Amberlynn's hands trembled as she picked up the pen. Ford's voice was calm, but it cut like a blade. "You signed away our marriage the day you signed your first lie." Amberlynn blinked rapidly, the pen slipping slightly in her grip. Ford did not move. He did not forgive. He did not hate. He simply enforced the end. Amberlynn scrawled her name across the divorce decree, her signature jagged and broken. Ford rose, gathering the papers neatly into a folder. At the door, he paused, looking back one final time. "You destroyed something beautiful for something rotten," he said quietly. "And now you live with what you chose." Then he turned and walked out, never looking back again. Amberlynn's sobs echoed in the empty room long after he was gone. Amberlynn Calhoun once ruled the city's social circles with manicured grace and a smile that hid sharp teeth. Now, she was radioactive. The morning after the divorce, headlines screamed her downfall. Gala queen exposed as fraud. Ford Calhoun's widow implicated in major corruption scandal. No charity board wanted her name attached to their fundraisers anymore. No society event wanted her face near their cameras. The invitations stopped overnight, like a guillotine severing her from the world she had once owned. She sat alone in her cold kitchen, a chipped coffee cup clutched between shaking hands, staring blankly at her silent phone. No texts, no calls. Even the so-called friends who had once praised her resilience after Ford's death now deleted her from their lives with surgical precision. The only visitor she received was from her landlord, delivering an eviction notice. The legal fees had drained her frozen accounts. The luxury home Ford had bought now belonged to the government, seized as evidence. Her kingdom was ashes. Her crown was dust. Amberlynn pressed her forehead against the cool marble countertop and closed her eyes, willing herself to wake from the nightmare. But reality offered no mercy. Everything she had touched, every lie she had spun, was unraveling. And Ford, the ghost she had betrayed, had orchestrated it all with chilling precision. Outside, a car pulled into the driveway. Not a luxury black car, but a battered tow truck, here to repossess the last of her stolen comforts. Amberlynn did not move. There was nothing left to save, not even herself. The Grand Calhoun estate, once the pride of Charleston's historic district, stood naked before the vultures. A court-ordered auction drew a crowd of the curious, the greedy, and the unforgiving. Ford Calhoun stood among them, invisible in the sea of strangers. He watched as Amberlynn's designer furniture was paraded out into the sunlight, tagged with fluorescent stickers. Her antique jewelry, her imported wine collection, even the wedding dress she had once worn with trembling vows was hung lifeless on a plastic mannequin, stripped of all meaning. Bidders called out numbers, laughing at the absurdity. A crystal chandelier Amberlynn had bragged about at every party went for a fraction of its worth. Ford did not bid. He did not need to. This was not about reclaiming objects. It was about stripping Amberlynn of every lie she had clothed herself in. At the end of the day, the house itself, the grand fortress where Ford had once dreamed of building a family, was sold to a real estate developer planning to gut it into luxury condos. Ford watched without flinching. That life was dead, and it deserved no tombstone. As the crowd dispersed, Ford turned and walked away. Behind him, the auctioneer's gavel cracked one last time against the podium. The final sound of a life auctioned away. Justice was not just cold. Sometimes it was deafening. Amberlynn sat on a splintered park bench, clutching a battered handbag to her chest, watching people move through the world she no longer belonged to. Her phone, once a buzzing hive of power and plans, was now silent except for one notification, a bankruptcy court hearing reminder. From queen to beggar in less than a season. An older woman she recognized from the gala committee passed by, nose wrinkling in disgust. A former friend crossed the street to avoid her. The shame was relentless. A cold drizzle began to fall, soaking through Amberlin's thin coat. She had sold most of her designer wardrobe weeks ago to pay her lawyer's retainer, a futile effort now. Bitter resentment burned in her chest. She blamed Ford. She blamed Nolan. She blamed everyone but herself. A man approached, holding a folded newspaper, a street vendor. "Bad luck, lady," he said without pity, nodding toward the headline. Amberlin Calhoun's final fall, from society darling to defendant. Amberlin snatched the paper, tearing it in half before tossing it into a nearby trash bin. The man laughed and walked away. Behind her, laughter echoed, not just from him, but from the city itself, it seemed. Amberlin shivered, pulling her coat tighter, shrinking into herself. For the first time, she realized something deeper than humiliation was taking root inside her. Loneliness. And it was a poison she could not escape. Not now. Not ever. Amberlin's name burned through every screen in the city like a scarlet letter. Local news anchors delivered the story with thinly veiled glee. Former society queen Amberlin Calhoun now faces additional fraud charges. National tabloids labeled her the widow of lies. Morning talk shows debated whether she deserved prison time or pity. Amberlin sat inside a grimy motel room, the curtains drawn tight, flickering TV casting shadows over peeling wallpaper. Her reflection in the cracked mirror was almost unrecognizable. Hollow eyes, sunken cheeks, makeup smeared from tears she could not stop shedding. Every news cycle brought fresh humiliation. A viral video replayed the gala scandal over and over. Her frozen face, Ford stepping onto the stage, the FBI agents closing in. She muted the television, unable to hear the laughter anymore. Her stomach churned. Her bank account was nearly empty. She had pawned her last valuable bracelet for a few nights of shelter. The final humiliation came when her court-appointed lawyer called. "Amberlin, there are new charges," he said bluntly. "Forgery, wire fraud, obstruction. If you do not cooperate further, you are looking at 15 years minimum." Amberlin pressed her forehead against the motel wall, the cold seeping into her bones. 15 years. By the time she got out, there would be nothing left of the life she had sacrificed everything to build. She thought she had played everyone, but in the end, she had only played herself. And she had lost. Completely. At a diner on the city's edge, Nolan Price leaned back in his booth, grinning across the table at a young prosecutor eager for his signature. The deal was simple. Testify against Amberlin Calhoun. In exchange, Nolan would serve a reduced sentence and keep a hidden portion of his stolen fortune, tucked away in an offshore account that the FBI had yet to uncover. Nolan did not hesitate. Amberlin was nothing to him now. A failed investment. A sinking ship. He scrawled his name on the agreement with a flourish, tossing the pen onto the table. As he rose, adjusting his jacket, he glanced at the television mounted on the wall. The news anchor's voice buzzed above the clinking dishes. Sources confirmed that Nolan Price is expected to testify against former partner Amberlin Calhoun, solidifying her prosecution in one of Charleston's largest corruption cases. Nolan smirked. Easy. Walking toward the door, he did not see Ford Calhoun watching from across the street, hidden under a baseball cap and dark sunglasses. Ford's face was unreadable, but his mind was already moving, calculating. Nolan thought he had won, but Ford had one more card to play, and it would make sure Nolan Price would not walk away from this clean. Not ever. Amberlin sat alone on the cold bench inside the processing center, chains rattling softly against her ankles. The heavy steel doors ahead of her creaked open. A female guard motioned. "Let's go." Amberlin rose slowly, her wrists shackled in front of her, her movements stiff and mechanical. They led her down sterile, echoing hallways, past women in orange jumpsuits, past faces she would have once called trash or nobodies from the heights of her charity galas. Now she was one of them. No makeup, no designer shoes, no stage smiles, just another number in a broken system. Her cell was small, barely larger than a walk-in closet. A metal bunk bolted to the wall, a toilet with no lid, a tiny slit of a window showing nothing but the gray sky. The guard shoved a folded uniform into her hands. Put it on. You are here now. The door slammed shut behind her with a sound that echoed in her bones. Amberlyn slid down onto the bunk, uniform still clutched in her shaking hands. Outside, laughter echoed through the cell block, harsh, bitter. Amberlyn curled into herself, pressing her forehead to her knees. There were no cameras here, no gala lights, no pity, only the cold, inescapable truth. She had destroyed everything, and now there was nothing left to save her from herself. Ford Calhoun sat at a worn table in a quiet diner, nursing a black coffee that had long since gone cold. The noise of the world buzzed around him. Forks clinking, soft conversation, a radio humming in the background. But inside, there was only silence. The news confirmed it hours ago. Amberlyn sentenced. Nolan's deal exposed. Maddox indicted. Justice had been served. Ford had won. And yet, as he stared into the bitter depths of his untouched coffee, a hollow ache sat heavy in his chest. He thought there would be satisfaction. He thought the hollow inside him would fill. But revenge, he realized, did not rebuild what had been broken. It only cleared the wreckage. A young waitress approached, smiling nervously. "Refill, sir?" she asked, holding the coffee pot like a peace offering. Ford smiled faintly, a shadow of what his smile used to be. "No, thank you," he said, voice low. She nodded and moved on. Ford watched her go, thinking how life around him moved forward without him. How he had lived so long inside a mission that he had forgotten what it was like to simply exist. His phone buzzed once on the table. "Jessica." Just a simple message. "Thank you. For everything." Ford placed the phone face down. Outside the window, the sky broke open into soft rain. Maybe he could not reclaim the life Amberlyn stole. But maybe he could start building something new, something no one could touch. The price had been high. Too high. But now, for the first time in years, Ford Calhoun was free to pay it forward. The next morning, Ford stood outside the battered doors of the Charleston Veterans Center. Rain dripped from the brim of his ball cap, soaking the collar of his jacket, but he made no move to hurry inside. This place had been an afterthought once, a charity Amberlyn had paraded around for photo ops, all while siphoning money through shell accounts. Now, it would be different. Ford had made sure of it. Inside, the center buzzed with quiet energy, volunteers sorting supplies, a counselor laughing softly with a scarred young Marine. Ford approached the front desk, nodding politely at the receptionist. "I am here to deliver something," he said, sliding a thick envelope across the counter. She opened it, her eyes widening. It was a donation, substantial, anonymous, enough to fund operations for the next 3 years. And it was only the beginning. Ford had already started funneling reclaimed assets into foundations Amberlyn had once exploited, restoring what was stolen, honoring the sacrifices that had been mocked by lies. It would not erase the past, but it would make damn sure the future was built better. As he turned to leave, a little boy standing with his father tugged on Ford's jacket. "Sir," the boy said shyly, "are you a hero?" Ford knelt slowly, looking the boy in the eye. "No," he said gently, "just someone who forgot for a while. But I am trying to remember now." The boy smiled and ran back to his father. Ford straightened, heart lighter than it had been in a long time. Sometimes, small victories mattered most. Ford returned to the old cemetery on the edge of the city, where a marble headstone still bore his name. Ford Calhoun, beloved husband and hero gone too soon, he stood in front of it for a long time, hands in his jacket pockets, feeling the mist settle on his skin. For years, this stone had been his exile, his hiding place, his prison. No more. A groundskeeper approached, tugging his cap respectfully. "You want it removed?" the man asked. Ford nodded once. "Yes, it is time." The groundskeeper set to work, the machinery humming quietly. Inch by inch, the false grave was pulled from the earth. Ford watched, unblinking. Beneath the sod, there was only damp soil and broken roots. Nothing lasting, nothing real. Just like the lies Amberlin built her life on. Ford turned and walked back to his truck, never looking back. Ghosts belonged in the past. And Ford Calhoun was done being a ghost. In a sterile courtroom downtown, the final rulings came swift and brutal. The funds recovered from Amberlin's fraudulent activities were redistributed to the organizations she had once preyed upon. The real estate scams were unwound. The stolen pensions were restored. Ford watched from the back row, silent, invisible, as the judge read the verdicts. When it ended, he slipped out before the reporters could clog the hallways. There was no need for congratulations. This had never been about revenge for headlines or applause. It had been about making it right, even if no one ever knew. He returned to his modest apartment that evening, stacking legal documents neatly into a safe. One envelope he kept separate. Inside was a check, the remainder of Amberlin's blood money that legally belonged to him after the seizures. Ford stared at it for a long time. Then he picked up the check, tore it in half, and dropped it into the trash. Some things were not worth keeping. Some things could never buy back what they cost. Ford stepped onto the small balcony, breathing in the cool night air. For the first time, he felt clean. The city sparkled below him, washed in silver light. A place broken, maybe, but not beyond saving. Neither was he. Not anymore. The cafe was small, tucked between two old bookstores on a quiet Charleston street. Rain dripped steadily from the awning outside, painting the windows in watery streaks. Ford Calhoun sat near the back, his coffee untouched in front of him. He stared out at the gray streets, calm but restless, a man slowly stepping out of a war he had fought alone. The door chimed as Jessica Donovan entered, brushing rain from her hair. She spotted him immediately and smiled. Not the brittle, strained smile he had seen so often lately, but something softer, more real. Ford stood to greet her, and for a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Jessica broke the silence. "I was starting to think you really were a ghost." Ford chuckled under his breath, the sound rusty but warm. "Sometimes I felt like one." They sat, a comfortable silence settling between them. Jessica stirred her tea absently. "I saw what you did," she said quietly. "For the Veterans Center. For all of it." Ford shrugged. "Just fixing what I should have seen sooner." Jessica shook her head firmly. "You could not have known. You trusted her. That is not a weakness, Ford." He looked at her then, really looked, and saw the strength behind her tired eyes, strength he had once admired. "Thank you," he said simply. Jessica smiled, tears glimmering unshed. "You deserved better," she said. Ford glanced out the window, watching a child splash through puddles. "Maybe now I can find it," he said. Jessica reached across the table, squeezing his hand once, firmly, before letting go. They did not need more words. Some scars were best acknowledged in silence. And some friendships, like some battles, were forged in fire. That night, Ford walked the streets of Charleston, the cool mist clinging to his jacket, the city lights blurring into soft halos. Everywhere he looked, memories lurked, some sweet, some poisoned. The old coffee shop where he and Amberlin had shared their first date. The park bench where he had once imagined proposing. The street corner where he had watched her kiss Nolan, hidden from sight. Ford paused beneath a flickering lamppost, staring up at the misty sky. Memories had weight, he realized. You could not erase them, but you could decide whether or not you let them chain you down. Ford pulled out a small leather notebook, the one he had used during his years at the CIA. Inside were notes, plans, missions, and, recently, sketches of a life he had imagined rebuilding. He tore out the page where Amberlin's name was written. He let the paper drift into the wet gutter, watched it dissolve into nothing. What remained now was not bitterness. It was space, room to breathe, room to build again. Ford tucked the notebook back into his pocket and turned down a side street, disappearing into the mist. The past would always be a part of him, but it would not define him anymore. The office was small, tucked above a law firm in an aging building that smelled faintly of leather and old wood. Ford stood at the window, overlooking the harbor, listening as the man behind the desk explained the offer. "You have experience most people could only dream of," said Thomas Beckett, a former federal agent turned private investigator. "And we could use someone who knows how to see what others miss." Ford said nothing for a long moment. After everything, stepping back into the world of shadows felt dangerous. But it also felt right. This time, there would be no lies. No betrayals waiting in the dark. Only justice. Real justice. "You would not be working under anyone," Beckett added. "Choose your cases. Set your limits. Work when you want. Walk when you want." Ford turned from the window, the decision already made somewhere deep inside him. "I am in," he said. Beckett smiled, extending his hand. Ford shook it firmly. As he left the office, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a clean light over the harbor. Ford Calhoun was not running anymore. He was hunting, but this time for the right reasons. And he was just getting started. Late that evening, Ford found a small envelope slipped under his apartment door. No return address. No name. Just his name printed neatly on the front. He hesitated for a moment, then tore it open. Inside was a letter, shaky handwriting filling the page. "Ford, I do not expect forgiveness. I do not even deserve it. I just want you to know, I never stopped loving you. I just forgot who I was. I am sorry. For everything." Amberlin Ford read the letter twice, the words burning into his mind. He sat quietly for a long time, the city humming softly beyond his window. Then he stood, walked to the fireplace, and fed the letter into the flames. The paper curled and blackened, turning to ash. Some ghosts needed to be buried. Some forgiveness was too expensive to buy. Ford watched until the last ember faded. Then he turned away, stepping into the night, leaving the past behind once and for all. The city lights shimmered across the harbor, reflecting in rippling gold and silver lines on the water. Ford leaned against the railing of a quiet pier, the cool breeze stirring his hair. He had come to this spot many times during his darkest nights, searching for answers, for peace, for meaning. Tonight, he did not search. He simply stood, breathing in the salt air, feeling the calm settle in his chest. The letter from Amberlin was gone, ashes scattered in the fireplace. The false grave was removed, no more pretending to be dead. The stolen funds were restored, lives rebuilt where there had been only ruins. But more importantly, Ford had reclaimed something Amberlin could never steal: his soul, his purpose. Footsteps approached behind him. Jessica. She joined him at the railing without a word, staring out over the water. "They are starting a scholarship in your name," she said softly. "For veterans' kids. Full ride to any college they want." Ford smiled faintly. "Good," he said. "Better than a statue." Jessica laughed quietly, bumping her shoulder against his. The two stood together as the stars began to pierce the night sky. Revenge had fueled him once. But redemption, building something better, was the fire that would carry him forward. A few weeks later, Ford found himself standing in front of a small, weathered house on the outskirts of town. Nothing fancy, no gleaming gates, no marble floors. Just a simple porch, creaking in the wind, a garden patch stubbornly sprouting wildflowers, and a faded blue door that looked like it had stories to tell. It was perfect. The real estate agent chattered nervously beside him. "It needs some work, Mr. Calhoun. Roof repairs, plumbing updates, paint." Ford smiled. "I like projects," he said. He signed the papers that afternoon, the keys warm and solid in his hand. As he unlocked the door and stepped inside, the scent of wood and dust filled his nose. Not decay, but history. He could almost hear the future whispering through the empty rooms. Laughter. New memories. A life rebuilt one brick at a time. Ford dropped his duffel bag onto the worn wooden floor and looked around. It was not just a house. It was a beginning, and he had earned every splinter of it. On a quiet Saturday morning, Ford sat on the back porch of his new home, a battered journal open on his lap. He wrote slowly, carefully, a habit long abandoned but strangely comforting now. He wrote about trust, how precious and fragile it was. He wrote about betrayal, how it cut deeper than any blade. But mostly, he wrote about resilience, how scars were not weaknesses, but reminders, proof that you survived. He wrote about Amberlyn, not in bitterness, but in honesty. She had been a lesson, a painful one, but necessary. He wrote about Jessica, how loyalty could survive even the worst storms. He wrote about himself, a man who had been broken, burned, buried, and had clawed his way back to the light. The words bled onto the pages like a slow healing. When he finished, Ford closed the journal gently and stared out over the backyard, where early sunlight painted gold across the grass. There were scars on his heart that would never fade, but they no longer weighed him down. They strengthened him. They told his story, and he was still writing it, one day at a time. At the edge of town, in a small diner tucked between rolling fields, Ford sat by the window, sipping fresh coffee and reading the paper. The headline made him pause. Amberlyn Calhoun denied parole. Nolan Price bankrupt. Justice holds. Ford folded the newspaper and set it aside. He felt no triumph, no gloating, just a deep, enduring peace. Justice was not about vengeance. It was about balance, about making sure the truth survived when everything else had been built on lies. The sun broke through the morning mist, bright and cold and beautiful. Ford stood, tossed a few bills on the table, and stepped outside. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and earth. He walked toward his truck, feeling the ground firm beneath his boots. No longer a ghost. No longer a prisoner of the past. A man alive. A man at peace. And somewhere, far beyond the mountains and rivers, the horizon stretched wide and open, waiting. Ford Calhoun smiled. The cold sun rose behind him as he drove toward it, toward whatever came next. The small-town festival bloomed with life. Colorful banners, the scent of roasting corn, laughter spilling from every corner. Ford Calhoun wandered through the crowd, a coffee in one hand, his free hand tucked into his jacket pocket. The children's faces painted like superheroes, the local band fumbling through a cover of an old rock song. It all felt right. Jessica waved from a booth across the green, her arms full of books she was donating to the local library. She wore a genuine smile, one free from shadows. Ford smiled back, a real smile that reached his eyes. For the first time in years, the ache in his chest was not loneliness. It was hope, strange and new but welcome. He helped an elderly man fix his collapsed tent, tipping his hat when the man clapped him on the back with thanks. He bought a caramel apple from a teenager who barely looked up from her phone. He sat on a bench under a sprawling oak tree and let the sound of life wash over him. No cameras, no betrayal, no lies, just real people, real moments. Ford leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the air thick with autumn and forgiveness. Sometimes healing did not come in grand gestures. Sometimes it came in quiet moments, standing under the sun, feeling like you belonged. Ford Calhoun was not looking back anymore. He was finally home. That night, Ford sat on the front porch of his house, a mug of tea warming his hands, the stars stitched thick across the sky. Jessica sat beside him, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. They talked about everything and nothing, how the Veterans Center was expanding, how the town was raising money for a new playground, how Ford might someday teach self-defense classes for kids who had no one else to protect them. The future was no longer something to fear. It was something to build. I used to think revenge would fix everything, Ford said quietly, staring out at the moonlit fields. But it doesn't. It just clears the wreckage. After that, it is up to you whether you plant something new. Jessica nodded, her eyes bright. And you are planting, she said. You're living. Ford smiled, slow and steady. I am trying. The night air wrapped around them, cool but comforting. Ford knew there would still be hard days. But now, there would also be good ones. Better ones. Ones he could choose for himself. And that was more than he had ever dared hope for when he first stepped into the storm. Months later, Ford walked the veteran center grounds under a sky streaked with sunrise. The kids played soccer on the field, laughing. Volunteers unpacked food for the community breakfast. Somewhere nearby, Jessica was painting a mural, a bright, soaring eagle against a blue sky. Ford paused, watching it all. Everything broken had not just been mended, it had been reborn. He felt the weight of the past finally lift off his shoulders, not because he had forgotten, but because he had survived it. He walked toward the field, feeling every step connect him to the earth, to the life he had fought so hard to reclaim. A small boy broke from the soccer game and ran toward him, kicking up dust. "Hey, mister," the boy called. "Are you a hero?" Ford knelt down to his level, smiling. "No, kid," Ford said softly. "I am just someone who decided not to stay broken." The boy grinned and sprinted back to his game. Ford stood, hands on his hips, breathing in the clean morning air. The past was behind him. The future was his to shape. And somewhere deep inside, Ford Calhoun knew he had not just survived the storm. He had become the one who built shelter for others. And that was the greatest victory of all. Now, the final connection for my audience. Before you leave, I want to ask you something deeply real. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to rebuild yourself from nothing? What did it teach you? Tell me below. I really want to hear your story. And hey, where are you watching this story from? Drop your country or city in the comments. It always amazes me how far stories can travel. If this story touched you even a little, if you believe in second chances and strength after betrayal, like the video, subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell, because we are just getting started. I promise, the next epic revenge thriller will hit even harder. Until then, take care of yourselves. Because sometimes, the greatest revenge is simply living a life worth living. See you in the next one.